Lunasa. So Lunasa, Lá Lunasa, Hana Yev Galer, that you might have a beautiful Lunasa day.
Oh, beautiful. And Cam, have you got a sort of equivalent in Wales?
Yeah, so I was just not it's not a big festival in Wales at all. Yeah, I think it's Calan Awst. But yeah, I could actually find very little information about Lunasa in Wales. So
But for all of this part of the world, it's the start of the harvest festival. So it's a time when food is at a plenty, and so you can expend a little bit more energy than usual in things such as games. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the Olympics fall at this time of year. So there would be sporting events, and there'd be the Highland Games in Scotland, and people would eat and be merry. And on the Sunday or on the Lunasata day, people could climb mountains as well. That was a very traditional thing to do. So it's a time to give energy to things before the harvest season really kicks off. So we're going to start tonight with Maria. Before we get into our stories, we've still got some spaces on the open floor in the second half. So we'll do the first half, the three of us, and that will take just under an hour. Then we'll have a 10-minute break, and then we'll open the floor for a short second half. But if you want to add your name to the list, message me directly and we'll pop you on. It'd be great to hear some voices from all over the country and actually further afield, I think. So anyway, over to you, Maria. I'm really excited to hear what you're going to tell us.
Yay! Well, it's beautiful to be here. Thank you so much to everybody for coming along on this first day of autumn. So it is the day when the wheel turns into the next part of the year. And because of that, we all know now that the veil thins at these times. And in Lunasa, they say that the moon's pull is so strong that it pulls all of the liquid up in us and it sends us all a little bit crazy. So because we're Celts, we used to have great dances around the fire, and this was the time to celebrate. It was also the time when you made your mehel partners. Mehel is an old Celtic tradition in Scotland, Ireland, and I think Wales as well, where all the neighbours came together and they helped one another to bring the crops in from their field, and then they go on to somebody else's field, and they used to have great pots of tea and bread in the fields and dances at the crossroads. So that is the time of Lunasa, and you might be familiar with this from the film Lunasa, based on an Irish play. So this story I created for Sheila Arnold in the USA, and it is based on the River Feel. A long time ago, in the time outside time, in the great kaleidoscope of time, the Tuatha Dé Danann lived on the edge of the River Feel, where the Listowel Castle is now. And Rhiannashi, the king of the fairies, he was able to draw magic from all that was nature, from the butterfly flying, from the blades of grass, from the river singing silver, the River Feel. But as time went on, he found that his magic took more time to pull. He began to feel thin in himself and in his spirit, and he began to wonder. So he went to the living things, to Ambradon Fassa, to the salmon of all knowledge, to the crows and the eagles, to the cows and on Mochtira, the wolves of the land. And they all told him the same thing. The time of the Tuatha Dé Danann was coming to an end, and soon mankind would tread the places and the spaces that they now occupied. This made his heart heavy, but it had been foretold, and he knew that he must make ready. At the same time that Rhiannashi was thinking like this, the big blue dragon that lives under the round stones in front of Listowel Castle stuck out her blue snout and sniffed the air. She could sniff something strange there. Rena, she, it's me, you see. Can we have a conversation? And he said, for you, Miss Thor, ma anam cara, my soul friend, of course I make time. And she spoke how she felt that there was a distance coming between them, and how she had known him from when she was a pup and he was a boy. And he looked at her and he said, oh, wise dragon, it is true. And he told her that the time of the two-a-day Dana was beginning to shift and change. Soon, he said, we would have to take the liminal places, the shadow spaces. We would shrink back in the knowingness of this world, and human beings will step forward, for it is their time to mind the earth. The dragon thought about this and said, what are my choices? And he said, if you come with us, you will retain some of your magic. But like us, you will shrink in the consciousness of man. You will also take the shadow places, the liminal spaces, and there will be a change in your body. You will grow long, and your wings will grow and flow and become invisible, but they will be iridescent. She tried that on her tongue. It sounded so nice. Iridescent. Oh, what does that mean? She said. Well, your wings will be invisible, but under the luminous moon, every colour known to man will dance across them. Reds and blues, greens and oranges, earth colours and jewel colours, shadow, shade and light will all compete on those wings for a place. I like the sound of that, she said. And then she sent her heart out to all of the dragons in the area, for that's how they communicated. And then she smiled and said, Rena, she, we agree, we come with thee. I'm delighted, he said. And they made their plan for the 1st of August, for Luna's Day. And there was a great parade of the She, the fair folk known as fairies, and they followed the path that mirrored the river field out into the great field at the end of the village. And there was standing stones. Green She took his place in the middle of those stones, a fairy cathedral, and he sent out all his She Driata, all his fairy magic, to land on the heads of the fair folk, and they felt themselves change, and they closed their eyes, and from the 6 feet that they had been, they shrank and shrank until they were only the size of a fuzzy bumblebee. Now it appeared to them that a blade of grass was the same size as a mighty oak. And the dragons changed too. Their bodies began to get long and thin and more blue and more colourful. And their wings, they grew and flew and fluttered and became iridescent under the luminous moon. And every colour of the world, like a promise of safety, flitted across those beautiful wings. That was the day, in a time so far away, when dragons became dragonflies on the banks of the river field. And today, if you see a dragonfly, you will know that their fair folk are not so far away. Happy Lunasa, Lunasa Hana year.
I just need to. There once was a man, and that man's name was Jack. Strong-armed Jack, they called him, because he could lift up a whole log with one hand, he could lift up a whole banqueting table with the other, and he wouldn't even notice it. Now, Jack could have used all of this strength to be powerful and rich, but he didn't. Jack was kind. He lived in a tumble-down little hut on the edge of a cliff. And from up here, each day he would see the fishermen trying to get their boats in out of the water. And he would go running down as fast as he could, and he would push them up onto the shore. Sometimes he would go to the village, he'd see little old ladies trying to chop their wood to keep themselves warm for the winter, and he would run as fast as he could to go and help them chop all their wood. Jack was kind. But Jack didn't just have a strong arm, he had a strong heart. No matter what the world threw at him, he never felt sad. No matter how cruel people were to him, he never got angry. And no matter how many months and years he spent living alone in that tumbled down little hut, he never felt lonely. Now, Jack was not just strong of arm and strong of heart, he was strong of mind. And the thing that he most liked to use his clever mind for was playing at cards. He was brilliant. There was not a person in the whole of Wales that could beat him. By the time he was 30 years old, people were coming from faraway places and faraway lands to try their hand at cards with Jack, but he was unbeatable. One night, Jack was alone as he was every night in his tumble down little hut, and almost out of nowhere, a great storm erupted. Jack wrapped a blanket around himself. Great waves were leaping up out of the ocean and thrashing themselves against the rocks below Jack's little house. All the clouds, they began to gather above him, and it was like they were raining and lightning just on Jack's little house. He wrapped that blanket a little tighter, and all of a sudden there was a knock at the door. Who could that be at this time in this storm? Jack opened the door, and there in front of him was a man. But this was no ordinary man. This man, from the top of his head to the bottom of his toes, was perfectly green. His teeth were like razors. His nose was long and pointed. So pointed, in fact, that it almost touched his chin. And his eyes, they were small and black, like little fleas. I am the little green man of no man's land, said the man, and I have come to play you at cards. It is late, there is a storm. What will I win, said Jack. Anything you wish for. Well, what kind of offer is this? You don't get offered anything you want every day of the week. Come in, he said, sit down. The two sat. And just as it happened every time, Jack won. Yes, said the green man. Right, he said, what is it that you want? And just at that moment, a rivulet of water came tumbling down Jack's roof. It came through the roof, it landed on his head, it went down his back and straight down his arse crack. I want a new roof, And then something came out of his mouth. He didn't even know that he'd wanted this before he said it. But I don't want a new roof on this tumble down little shack. I want a new roof on a great castle. Rat, said Little Green Man. It is done. Now, what I did not mention was that night the moon, it was bright and full and it was pouring through the window. It was like sunlight. And as soon as the Green Man clapped his hands, the moonlight vanished. Jack went to the window. Towering down from above him, there was a great black castle. Play me again, said Jack. Very well, said the Green Man, I'll play you again, but this time if I win, I take back my castle and I also pick the prize of my choice. I mean, Jack looked around at his tumbled down little hut. He had nothing to lose. Very well, he said. They sat down. No, for the first time in Jack's life, he lost. Yes, said the Green Man. Now it is time for me to take my prize, Jack. And I choose your head. My head, said Jack. Your head. My head. But I need my head. I want your head, Jack. But I'm kind. I'll give you a chance. We are going to make this a little bit of fun. We are going to play hide and seek. I will count down from a year and a day. And if you can find me in that time, then you can keep your head. But if you can't, then your head is mine. It's going to be so much fun, Jack. Are you ready? 3, 2, 1. And as quickly as he had arrived, he went, and he took with him the great storm. Sweat poured down Jack's face. He immediately began to shake. He grabbed a bag. He stuffed the bag full of bread. He saddled his skinny brown horse. He jumped on its back and he rode. And he searched. For the first 6 months, he searched up and down the border between England and Wales. For the next 3 months, he searched the coastline. For the next month, he searched through the middle of Wales. He was beginning to run out of time. 11.5 months went by, and now Jack was only sleeping for 2 or 3 hours each night. He just kept hunting for the Green Man, but it was as though he had vanished off the earth. One night, he was searching. It was late. The moon was as thin as a piece of thread. It was so dark he could barely see his own hand in front of his face. In front of him, he saw a light. He rode towards it. The light led him into a forest, a thick, dark, nasty, claustrophobic forest. It led him deep into the center. In the center of the forest, there was a house, but this house was tumbling down. Its roof was collapsing. Its walls were falling in. Surely nobody could live here. But sure enough, there in the window, there was a light. He opened the rickety gate. He went down the path. He knocked on the door. The door opened. And there in front of him, he saw the oldest woman that he had ever seen in all of his days. Her face was turned into 1,000 wrinkles and her eyes shone out like stars. It was as though those blue eyes pierced straight into his heart. When she saw Jack, she smiled. "What has taken you so long, Jack? I have been waiting for you. Would you like me to help you?" And strong-armed Jack, who needed the help of no one, for the very first time felt tears welling in his eyes. Yes. The old woman showed him in. She gave him a good meal. With his stomach full, he found himself falling into a deep sleep on the soft bed. When he awoke, he had bony fingers grabbing onto his shoulders. Wake up, Jack, it is time. The old lady led him outside. Up against her house, there was a great ladder. The old lady, she clambered up this ladder like a mouse, straight up to the top, straight onto the roof. She scuttled up the roof, onto the chimney. Around her neck, there was a great horn. She put the horn to her mouth and she blew. Now, this was a sound like Jack had never heard. It made the very air around him vibrate, the ground vibrate, and then all of a sudden, the sky went black. There was this great fluttering of wings. For as far as the eye could see, there were birds from all the four corners of the earth. My friend here, Jack, is looking for the green man of no man's land. Do any of you birds know where he might find him? And there was a squawking and a chattering. And then this little Jenny wren, it came flying over to the old woman and it settled on her plait and it seemed to be whispering into her ear. Thank you, she said, her face fell solemn. Thank you. The birds were gone. She climbed down from the roof. Jack, I am so sorry. I was so sure I could help you. This was the end. Jack would lose his head. And then all of high up in the sky, something, the biggest castle on the roof. I'm sorry I've been so long, said the eagle. I know the green man that you seek. He is my captor. It was not easy for me to get away. He keeps me trapped on a great glass mountain. If you want to find the green man, Jack, you must travel as far as you can to the north. You must travel to the Lake of Silence. When you get there, you must hide. 3 great swans will appear. They will turn into maidens. They will dive into the water. As soon as they do, Jack, you must jump from your hiding place and snatch up their feather coat. A maiden will scream, she will cry, she will beg, but you must not return it to her. Do you understand, Jack? Yes, I understand. I must go. And with that, the great eagle flapped its great wings and it was gone. The old woman, her hands, a great black horse appeared. Your skinny brown horse is tired, Jack. Take this. Take this ball of string. You must throw this string between the horse's ears and it will take you where you need to go. How can I ever repay you? Said Jack. Jack climbed onto the horse. He took the string, he threw it between the horse's ears, and it was immediate. The horse flung into gear. It was as though the horse was moving faster than the speed of light. It was almost as though he arrived before he had even left. It was silent. The lake was clear. Jack swung his leg over the horse. He landed on the ground, and as his feet touched the ground, the horse vanished. To his right, there was a great reed bed. He snuck into the reeds and he waited. And he waited and he waited until day turned into night. The great moon rose in the sky, and then he saw it, the silhouette of 3 beautiful, elegant swans. They circled around and around and around, and as they grew nearer, they no longer seemed elegant. Their wings were so strong, so powerful, they landed on the ground with a great thud. Their necks were so powerful, they could have broken his neck in an instant. Suddenly, he was so afraid. And then their coats, they zipped open like a great jacket. It squirmed and pushed its way out, and the feathers of the 3 birds fell to the ground, and 3 maidens covered in this disgusting slime came out of the feathers. The 3 women, they danced like lunatics in the moonlight, and then they leapt up into the air and down into the lake. As soon as they dived down into the lake, Jack jumped up from his hiding place. He snatched up one of the feather coats, and as soon as he touched it, he heard the screaming. This screaming stopped your breath. It stopped your heart. Please, she shouted. Please, please, please give it back to me. She threw herself to her knees. Please, I need it. And Jack knew that if he gave it back, he would lose his life, but Jack was kind. Nobody has done that before, Jack. I will help you. And with that, the maiden put on her feathers. She turned back into a swan. Climb on my back, she said. She jumped into the water. Jack climbed onto her back. He held on. She swam through the lake. It was silent. Eventually, they came to an island. I must stop here, Jack. If the green man knows that I've helped you, he will kill me. Jack climbed from the swan. Thank you, he said. One last gift for you, Jack. And with that, she turned and she plucked out 3 of her feathers and she gave them to him. If you need me, take one of these feathers and blow it into the air and I will come for you. How will I ever repay you? And with that, the swan turned her neck and she was gone. Jack waded to the island. He went along a path. It was a tumble-down castle with ivy growing in through the windows. He went through the falling down doorway, and there in front of him, sitting on a 3-legged stool, was the green man sharpening his axe. When he looked up and he saw Jack, how did you do this? Somebody has helped you. You have tricked me, Jack. And so I will give you 3 more challenges. Take this axe, Jack. On the other side of this island, there is a great forest. I want you to chop it down. If you can chop down the forest before the sun comes up tomorrow, then I might think about letting you keep your life. But if you don't do it, Jack, then you're dead. Well, this would be easy. Jack was strong. Jack had cut down 100 trees. He took the axe, he went to the forest, and he began to swing his great axe. But no matter how hard he swung his axe at the tree, it didn't even dent its bark. An hour went by, and now he was pouring with sweat. He was exhausted. He fell to his knees and let out great sobs. And then he remembered the feathers. He reached down into his pocket. He pulled out one of the feathers. Immediately he heard the sound of those great wings circling around him. The swan landed in front of him. Go and lie down on the heather, Jack, and I will solve this for you. Jack lay down on the heather and immediately he fell asleep. When he awoke, the sun was shining in his face. He stood up, he rubbed his eyes, and the forest had been felled. The swan was nowhere to be seen. The green man appeared. How did you do this, Jack? Somebody is helping you. You may be able to do that, but you won't be able to do this. I want you to put each of those trees back where they came from. I want every leaf in its place. If you can do that before the sun goes down tonight, then you might be in with a chance. But if you can't, I will chop off your head. But how can I do that? That's impossible. You're so clever, Jack. You're a problem solver. I'm sure you will find a solution. And with that, the green man vanished. And Jack tried. He really tried. He tried to heave those logs into place, but of course, as soon as he propped them up, they fell back down. He reached his hand into his pocket. He pulled out a second feather and he blew. And almost immediately, the great swan appeared. She landed in front of him. Lie down, Jack. Take a rest. I will fix it for you. He lay down. His eyes grew heavy. When he awoke, it was cold. The moon was shining. And he couldn't believe his eyes. He thought perhaps he had gone mad. Because shining in the bright moonlight, there was the great forest, almost as though it had been untouched. Immediately, the green man appeared. How did you do this, Jack? Somebody is helping you. You might be able to do that, but you won't be able to do this. Across the silent lake, there is an island. On the center of the island, there is a great glass mountain. At the top of the great glass mountain, there is a great nest. In the great nest, there is an eagle. That eagle sits on an egg. I want you to get that egg and bring it back to me. And if you do, well then, Jack, we are even, and you may go on your way. And with that, the green man vanished. One feather left. He reached his hand into his pocket. He took it out and he blew. Immediately, the swan appeared. Climb onto my back, Jack. He wrapped his arm around the swan and she began to beat her wings. He was heavy, but she was strong. He went up into the air, across the lake. Down below him, he could see the great glass mountain. It was enormous. It was so smooth on every side. How was he ever going to be able to climb it? The swan landed with a great thump at the foot of the mountain. I will transform, Jack. I will transform into a ladder and you can climb up me. And with that, she transformed immediately into a ladder. Jack climbed. And climbed and climbed and climbed and climbed and climbed. The top of the mountain touched the sky. Eventually he got to the top and he found himself face to face with the great eagle. You've done it, Jack. You've done it. Take the egg. The curse is broken. I am free and you will keep your head. Jack took the great golden egg. He climbed down the ladder. The swan transformed. She carried him back to the island. She stood behind him. The green man saw the egg. He said, give me the egg, Jack. No, said Jack. Give me the egg, Jack. No, said Jack. And with that, he lifted the egg high above his head and he threw it onto the floor and it smashed into 1,000 pieces. The green man, he began to shriek and to yell with agony. His head melted into his neck into his body into the floor. And then it was as if a miracle happened. Up out of that green mess appeared flowers. Hundreds and hundreds of wild flowers all around his feet. He turned round to show the swan, but she was gone. He was alone. He lay down next to the flowers. He looked up at the sky. Tears streamed down his face. And for the first time in Jack's life, he felt lonelier than ever. And then all of a sudden he saw Swan flying past the moon. She came and she landed with a great thump in front of him. Would you like me to help you, Jack? She said. And with those tears streaming down his face, he said, yes.
According to huva Munian down boya According to huva Hormohari hargnai Irgach brui krobjeltim According to huva Munian down boya According to huva. It was a glorious day on the Isle of Skye, and the lassies, they'd left the village and they'd headed up to the foothills of the Cullen Mountains. They would spend a lovely evening there picking blaeberries. Somebody had a bottle of cider. They'd be chatting and they'd be laughing and they'd be soaking up the last rays of the evening sun. Somebody had heard a story about a strong armed boy called Jack, and she was in the midst of it all. It was very exciting. But one of the lassies, she was not in the mood for this frivolity. She had had a dream the night before. She couldn't exactly remember what it was about, but it was something to do with a crown and there was something to do with a cave. And the rest was just a sensation and she couldn't shake it. So she said, I'll just go a bit higher up, lassies. I won't be long. And they said, okay, but make sure you don't go too far and mind for the cliffs, it's dangerous. But she left them. And soon, under the heat of the sun, she took off her bonnet and she let her hair fly loose. And she could feel it on her arms. She rolled up her sleeves. And she could taste the sweet blaeberry in her mouth. And with the repetition of the work, she kind of got lost in a trance. And before long, she realized she couldn't hear her friends chatter anymore. And the sun had gone in. In fact, not only had it gone in, the mists had risen, which I know is a cliche for a storytelling event, but the mists had risen and it happens. That's when the magic comes. And in Skye, you have to be very careful. When the mists rise and they come above your face and they obscure your view, you can lose your footing. There are cliffs you can fall down. There are ravines that can swallow you in an instant. There's holes. And she knew she couldn't move anywhere because she could lose her footing and she could fall to her death. So she stayed where she was and she strained her ears to listen for her friends. But nothing. Nothing. And she was there for a long time. And she felt the sun leave. It was now night and the mist hadn't cleared. This wasn't a normal mist. And then all around her, she realized there was something stalking, something moving. No, not one thing, a few things moving around her, prowling around her. And she saw out of the mist they had dark eyes glinting at her, and dark noses and pink tongues. And there was more and more of them and they were getting ever closer. And then she realized that they had little tiny furry ears and a soft coat and a furry tail, and actually they were deer. They were deer and they were interested in her blaeberries that she had at her foot, and she was safe. Because if there's deer, the deer are sure-footed and they can lead her through the mountains without any harm. She gives him a blaeberry and a cute little baby eats it, and she strokes its back and its mother comes too, and soon the deer are all around her. They like her. And then they stand. They all face one direction and they begin to move. And they heard our girl with them. They heard her up the mountainsides, higher and higher. She knows she's safe, but they keep going. Up the mountainside, steeper than she knew the Cullens went. It took a long, long time until finally they rose above the mists and the moon was full and bright and shining down and the stars were out in this land. This was not a place she'd ever seen before. She wasn't even sure it was Scotland. In the distance, there was huge mountain peaks the highest she'd ever seen. There was waterfalls and rivers. Was that a unicorn? And in front of her was a huge cave mouth, and the deer led her right to the mouth of it. And sitting there in the cave mouth was an old woman, a Cailleach, and she was smiling at this girl as if she'd been waiting for her. She explained, "Oh, madam, I have been lost, and this is what happened. The deer led me here." And the Cailleach said, "I know, they're my deer. I called you here." And she calls to her husband, "Bodach, she's arrived." And in the back of the cave, the girl sees an old man, a Bodach, lift his head up. He's been staring into a deep pool at the back of the cave. "Oh, nice to meet you," and back down to his business. The Cailleach says that she will take the girl back down the mountain safely. She knows the way, of course. Well, her deer do. But she's not going to do it tonight. And she won't do it for the next year. If the girl is agreeable, she would like the girl to stay with them for a year and a day. And in that time, the Cailleach will teach her all of the names of the things, all of the names of the plants and the animals. She'll teach her all of their uses, all of their many thousands of uses. Each one has many thousands of uses. She'll teach the girl how to harvest, how to grow, how to dry, how to smoke, how to stew, how to create. She'll teach the girl the old songs. And importantly, she'll teach the girl the old stories. And if the girl is willing, and if the girl works hard, then she'll even teach the girl what they do in this cave. And of course, the girl is agreeable, and she says, "Aye, Cailleach, I'll stay." And she does. For a year and a day, she works for the old man and the old woman in this new land. The mist never clears. She never sees what's beneath it, but she's sure that she's not in Scotland. And she does learn what they do in that cave. The Cailleach asked the girl to select special herbs, specific flower buds or flower heads, or dig up particular roots. And each night she makes a fire and she smokes these plants on top of it. And this creates smoke formations which are so unique, are so beautiful. They curl and they furl and they're all different colours. And these smoke formations can be seen in the pool at the back of the cave. And the Bodach, each evening, he stares into this pool. He sees the shapes forming on the surface and he sculpts them. He sculpts the shapes he sees. He makes little creatures and different little landscapes. And at the end of the evening, as the sun's just about to set, he takes them in both hands, these sculpted forms that he saw reflected in the pool, that he saw reflected from the smoke that he gathered with the girl during the day. And he holds out these little these forms, and they take on the colour of the sunset. And this hand, these are good dreams. They are the dreams that make us feel warm and safe and protected and inspired. And in this hand, these are the dreams that you might call bad. These are your nightmares, the ones that make you uncertain, that make you feel uneasy. But listen, you can learn a lot from these dreams. And then the birds come down, the swans and the Jenny wrens and the robins and the eagles take these dreams off around the world and deliver them to everyone sleeping. And in this hand, the ravens and the hawks and the crows, they take these dreams, they take them off around the world to people sleeping. After a year and a day, the old man and the old woman said, "You have done well, child. You have done so well." And they gave her a huge embrace and she felt the love of the mountainside. And they gave her a torque. This is a necklace that signifies that she has become royalty. And when it's time, the deer collect her and take her down back through the mist, down and down, and it does take a long time, down through the mist to the bay. And she sees her village in the distance and she imagines her mum waiting for her and she wants to tell her everything she's learned. But the deer don't let her go yet. They stay with her, and they all turn and face out to the sea. And so by this point, she doesn't question it. She does the same. And she sees in the distance a boat coming. And on the boat is a man. And he's a haughty. Dark skin, a big smile, broad shoulders, strong arms. And he's laughing. He's laughing his head off. And as he comes closer, she sees he is wearing a torque that signifies he is royalty. And he's calling out to her, I saw you! I saw you in my dreams! A year ago, I saw you here. I knew you'd be here. I've been sailing for a year to find you. And of course, he was a king or a prince of a faraway land. And of course, he asked her to go with him. And he already knew that she was so wise, the wisest person. And she agreed. After she'd seen her mum and said, I love you, sorry, I've been away for a year. You can come and visit me whenever you want. She got on his boat and they sailed into the new land. And she took with her all of the knowledge that the Cailleach and the Bodach had shared with her on that mountain on Lugh Santa. And that's the end of that. Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing in the first half. And wow, it's wonderful to hear Maria's original story, and Kama's is essentially original, based on stories that she will have weaved together. I'm so honoured to have been there for both of those. We're going to have a quick 10-minute break, and we'll be back, shall we say, at 9 o'clock for the second half. And we've got 5 tellers in the second half. So it's going to be really, really diverse and interesting. Is there anything you want to add, Kama and Maria?
Maria, you're muted. You're muted. I could unmute you. Oh.
Oh, muted.
Oh, I'm on new technology in a strange place. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, listen, I've really enjoyed the first half. It was absolutely excellent. But I feel all fingers and thumbs tonight in terms of tech. It's a Lunasa is the time when crazy happens and it's acceptable. So I'm glad that today is the day that this tech stuff has happened for me. And I just really enjoyed your story, Shona, and also Kama's. So thank you so much. Mwah.
Oh, brilliant. So we'll see you all back in 10 minutes. See you in a minute. that was amazing. Are you working on it for something? Oh, you're muted.
No, I'm not working on it for anything specific, but yeah, just
It's
been working on practice really.
How are you, Elaine?
Good, thanks.
Oh, good. Seeing you a fair bit this weekend. That's nice.
I know. I'm like your Zoom stalker.
No, I'm like your stalker, I think.
Oh, it's a bit of both then.
Have you been to one of these events before?
Yes.
Oh, you have one.
I've not been to all of them.
Oh no.
But, I was at another one and it was just beautiful. It was probably the winter one. Just
Yeah.
amazing. So when I saw this one come up, I thought, oh right, I've got to join this.
Yeah, they're always really fun.
And then I re-up alert and I thought, oh right. And then found that I'd booked for it. I thought,
Hey.
but the stories have been fantastic.
Okay, I mean, I've seen you. Oh no. You're telling one about a giant.
Yes, with 10 heads. No,
Oh.
10
Just chatting.
Oh.
How are you
Oh,
doing,
it's
Liz?
Toby Hayes music, beautiful.
That's Toby Hayes. It's nice, isn't it?
Yes, yeah,
Love.
I've been following him
Oh,
a bit when I could, yeah. So 2 poems at the beginning and 1 at the end, okay?
that's brilliant. Yeah,
Yeah,
we've still got 5 minutes and then
Yeah,
gather people.
I'll relax for that 5 minutes.
Oh no, would you rather do them all at the start?
No, there's one that's more suitable for the end. Well, that's the one I sent you that's evening. I thought that could come better at the end.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Yeah. If you remember evening,
Yeah.
full of colours.
Yeah.
Okay. Storytelling was amazing. I love that.
Good, yeah, me too. I really enjoyed it.
I used to go to a lot of storytelling events near where I live.
Where are you based?
Central of England.
Oh,
I complete Wales, Scotland, Ireland, and the other bit.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
But you live in a beautiful part of the world. We go to Scotland a lot.
yeah, I'm very lucky. How are you doing, Fionn?
I'm vibing.
You're
Ignoring,
vibing.
I'm ignoring the fact that my bedroom is a complete mess over to that side of me.
Why do you think I'm in the garden?
Yeah, it's a good way to avoid.
Because Ailsa not able to make it.
No, apparently she's unpacking a boat. Yeah, like when I was I messaged her on Instagram at 8 saying, "Are you coming or not?" And apparently she's literally just got back in from being in the land of no internet for 3 days. So I can imagine she's pretty tired.
Yeah. Elaine, Fionn is like Welsh Ailsa.
Oh,
Sort of. They're just 2 young storytellers that are really great. So I'm trying to snatch her. You want to see the view here before folks get back?
Yeah.
Oh, let's see.
Sun's just gone behind the hill.
Oh, look at
Oh,
that.
that's lovely. And it's just framed by the leaves. Oh, it's beautiful.
The leaves, yeah, all the junk. Oh, there it is. This is one of Derek's. Oh, we can see. Oh, that's a great shot, Derek. It's
That's
gorgeous.
That's really
Ooh.
pretty.
Mm.
I loved Friday at the Good Crack. It was brilliant.
Yeah, it was really fun.
You did amazingly well.
I really, I was so glad people got into it. And people were sending me direct messages like, "Great case study."
Well, that was Jan B. Brown. That was the teacher in her coming out.
Oh yeah. Brilliant. I had fun. Oh, great. Derek and Sue, I have to pop by and say hello properly this week. I will do.
That would be nice.
Anytime. Yes, I was mooted.
I'm here. I'm not doing anything this week, just no officey stuff. So
Oh, I
Pop
drop
down
in.
anytime. We're
Oh.
both here. Sue's work. Well, we're both
Not-
working here. So.
Not Wednesday.
Oh, what's happening on Wednesday?
Taking the dog to the groomers.
Oh yeah, dog's going for a hairdo on Wednesday.
need to hear you.
That'd be nice.
That'd be lovely.
Would like that.
Yeah. All right.
You wanted to save a space in the car park, or would you walk down?
Oh, I just walk. I can't park. I just does feel like a cookie one. All right, shall we get back to it? Camera. Okie dokie. Brilliant. Yeah, thanks again for joining us for the second half. I do feel a little bit sort of wired to the moon today. I don't know what's going on. Aye, brilliant. I think that's really good. So we're going to kick off the second half with a poem from Liz, or maybe two poems. If you're ready, Liz.
Yes, I'm ready to go. Yes, so the first one is a poem that I thought would be suitable for the end of summer. So this is called Summer Blooming. Warm winds stir flamboyant poppies to flutter their frilly crimson skirts and sway flirtatiously among serried ranks of golden wheat, standing stiffly to attention. Cornflower, corncockle, and ox-eye daisies join in the dance, sensing the irresistible rhythm, throbbing in the sultry pollen-laden air. Delicate butterflies perform a ballet above, vying for attention with the cornfield burlesque. Shy forget-me-nots and scarlet pimpernel peep from shady margins. Fluffy-headed thistles and willow herb hold close to the hedgerow, where honeysuckle and bindweed intertwine. Swallows swoop and skylarks soar high above, broadcasting across the land news of the joyous orgy. Across the lane, roses, gladioli, and lilies peer over the fence and gaze snootily at their country cousins, flaunting their higher breeding, while secretly resenting their controlled, sterile existence. Thank you. And this is the second one. We've had quite a lot of chat about birds tonight, certainly from Karma's storytelling. This one's about a bird, and this is from my collection just published, Shifting Rocks, which I'm just selling direct and through my son Tony, because all the proceeds are going to charity. So I'm not paying Amazon 50%. It's going to charity instead. So this one is Elation. A lark lifts on blurring wings, soaring high above the gloom, blanketing the horizon. To dance her dance against a rosy salmon sky. No predators fly above, no dangers lie below. The sun peeps over the horizon, dispelling greyness, casting rainbow rays across the land, highlighting ridges on rocks, warming grey grasses to green and bracken to burnished copper. The lark soars higher still, sharpening the air with her cascading song, and, touched by the new day, turns to molten gold. There you are.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you so
I'll see you all again at the end, hopefully.
That would be
Thank
brilliant.
you.
Thank you. I think this is an excellent time just to mention a few bits of housekeeping and important things, like our support from Carad Art Centre in Wales and from Kerry Writers Museum in Kerry, our friends, and also from Argyll Arts that are supporting us here in Lough Goylehead. Aster is behind the scenes. She's the one that helps us and clicks things in and makes it sound good and look good. So we really appreciate that. And is there anyone else I should mention, Kama or Maria? The other thing was we are recording tonight, but it only records the speakers. So if you're speaking tonight and you'd rather that wasn't in, we're going to put it on YouTube. If you'd rather it didn't go on YouTube, then just let us know and we'll make sure that bit's out. Brilliant. So we're gonna carry on now with Sophia. If you're ready, take it away.
This is an Alaskan story called The Mountain Goddess. Oh, I like it. The Mountain Goddess. Her spade-like hands hold firmly around a tall structure. She breathes. She fills with love, and she carved this very pillar. It's made of all types of material. It is made from sparkly stardust from midnight sky. It is made from red, earthy, wet clay packed in. It is made with ice from the top of the Alaskan mountains and seashells at the seashore. Now, this goddess has a very big responsibility. A very big responsibility. She holds and supports the pillar that the world rests upon. She prevents the big globe of water and earth not falling deep into the cosmic ocean. You may call her the roots of the cosmos. You may think of her as the foundation of gravity. But her name is, let me get this right, Agus Chang'ak. She is the Mother Earth of the Tlingit people, indigenous people of Alaska, and they love and they respect her. Now, this pillar could collapse, but it does not. It is not an easy job this mountain goddess has been given. But even if this goddess is powerful and kind, a goddess needs to endure hiccups and tribulations. Now, whoever is listening or watching me tell this story, if we have siblings, we do know that when we are reunited, we're loud, we're boisterous. Well, I am personally. And her brother visits once a year. Oh, he is so excited to see her that he gives her big thunder hugs. And he has news of the world darting from his mouth and his eyes in electric blue and purple lighting. She cradles the pillar and she speaks softly and deeply from the bottom of her diaphragm, not to lose her balance, and says to him, "Brother, watch, I'm holding the pillar." And when all is calm, another visitor comes along. He desires to have playtime and see to all his needs. He is a trickster and a keeper of secrets. He does what he wants and desires and flies where he wants to. He is admired and also feared by the Tlingit people. It is the black and blue raven. He flies and swishes and tickles her on her nose continuously for days. He tries to trick her to abandon her post, but she refuses. However, the tickling of the feathers angers her, torments her at his own peril, that the way she responds is earthquakes, thundering, shifts the land, disturbs the Tlingit people. But she doesn't let go of her earth post. So as you can see, weather, animals, natural disasters can make a goddess wobble. Where she lives, it's so cold. And her people on festival days bring her offerings of fire to keep her core warm, and her hands warm. So this story is a gentle reminder of our Native American goddess who is holding with strength the earth pillar, just so we can eat and drink and laugh and feel safe on our planet. And that is me. Woo, I unmute.
Oh. Gosh, that was no small themes there. God, the center of gravity. That was a really epic space that you created. Thanks, Sophia. Brilliant. We're going to hand over now to Nerissa. So if you're ready, Nerissa, you can take take the space. To make sure you're unmuted. There you
Unmute
go.
myself. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, good. So I was thinking of the themes of Lunacy and the colours of Lunacy
Nice.
and the orange and the gold and the fire and the flames. And since I'm telling a Norse story, I decided to draw some runes today. And I couldn't believe it because the runes I drew were the runes for harvest, possessions and nourishment, and fertility. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
So one of the kennings for gold was Sif's hair. Sif, goddess of fertility, wife of Thor, who most of you know as the god of thunder, I expect, but he was also a fertility god, and his mother was Yoth, the earth. Sif was asleep, and her golden hair, gleaming like gold, like ripened corn, was flowing all over her pillow. But in the dark corner stood Loki, his eyes flaming red, and he had in his hand a knife like a scythe, and he chopped all that hair as if it was a field of corn indeed, and she was left with just stubble on her head. But she slept through it all. In the morning she woke up and she felt her head. And at first she was silent with shock, and then she screamed. And I won't inflict that scream on you via Zoom because the sound doesn't work very well. And of course it brought Thor running. And they both knew that only Loki, the trickster, the sly one, could have done this. So Thor went and he came back dangling Loki, who was saying, "Oh, it was just a joke, just a joke." And Thor said, "You restore Sif's hair to her, or I'll break every bone in your body." And Loki was off. He went out of Asgard, over Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge, into the dark land of the dwarves and their caverns. And he came to the two sons of Ivaldi. And of course he flattered them, saying that only the dwarves had enough skill in working with gold and precious metals and in weaving the magic spells to create hair out of gold that would actually grow back onto Sif's head. And they said, "What's in it for us?" And Loki said, the friendship of the gods and of myself. They knew not to trust Loki. Who did trust Loki until the very end? And that brought destruction, as we all know. But they got the bellows and the wood, and they fanned the flames, the golden and the red and the white hot flames. And casting magic spells the whole time, they made, first of all, hair out of gold that was like a sheet of gold, but if you only blew on it, it ruffled like real hair. And then they thought, well, it's a shame to waste all this flame and heat. Let's make something else at the same time. So they made a magical ship for the fertility god Freya. And they also made a spear for Odin, Allfather. And they gave them to Loki. But Loki didn't go straight back to Asgard with these gifts. No, his desire to make mischief was too strong for that. So he went to another deep, dark cavern, to the dwarves Brock and Eitri. And he showed them these gifts and said, "Have you ever seen such fine workmanship?" And Brock and Eitri said, "Yes, our workmanship is finer than that." And this was exactly what Loki had planned. So they also brought wood and fanned the flames of the fire, red and golden and orange and white hot. And they made 3 more magical gifts to take back to Asgard. And Loki had wagered his head, sort of secure that he would win, or if he didn't win, he could wriggle out of it. And Brock came back to Asgard with Loki just to check there was no extra trickery. They got back, and Thor, Freya, and Odin were to judge the quality of these treasures. So they came to Gladsheim, which lived up to its name because they were all shouting with joy to see these treasures. And the magical hair out of gold immediately attached itself to Sif's head, and it was magnificent and gleaming gold again, and everyone was happy. Then the ship Skidbladnir had these magical properties that as soon as the sails were set, a wind would blow that would carry the ship wherever the gods needed to go. And when it was no longer needed, you could fold it up and fit it in a purse. And then Gungnir, the spear for Odin, never missed its mark. Those were the 3 gifts of the sons of Ivaldi. The 3 gifts of Brock and Eitri were as follows. There was Gunabursti, a magical boar whose bristles were of gleaming gold. No horse could catch up with this boar, and the boar could travel over land, sea, and in the sky. And even when it was dark, those bristles would gleam so brilliantly that it was as if it was daylight. And then there was Draupnir, an armband of gold for Odin. And finally, Mjolnir, the hammer made of iron for Thor, which had the properties that it would never break, that he could never lose it because it would come back wherever it was thrown to. And also, if he didn't need it and he needed to hide it, he could hide it in his clothes. It would become small. Well, all the gods agreed that Mjolnir was the best gift. And so Brock, he said, "Then I get Loki's head." And Loki said, "My head? But what use to you is that? I'll give you its weight in gold." Well, dwarves don't need gold. So Loki said, "Well, catch me then." And he ran off. And we all know he's called Sky Traveller and Shapeshifter. But even he wasn't too fast for Thor to catch him. So Thor brought him back. And then Loki said, "Well, you can take my head, but you can't have any part of my neck." And all the gods laughed. And Rocky saw that he was beaten yet again by Loki, the trickster. And he said, well, if I can't have your head, at least I'll shut your mouth from those sly lies. And he sewed Loki's lips together with his brother's awl. And all the gods laughed. And Loki left, and as soon as he'd left, he tore the leather out from his lips, regardless of the pain. And he could hear the happy humming of Asgard and Gladsheim. And he began to plan his revenge. And that's my story.
Thank you so much, Nerissa. Thank you for that golden, huge story. I hope it's not the end of summer yet. I hope we've got a little bit. I'm praying for a little bit more. Thanks so much. I really, really enjoyed that. Brilliant. Next up, we have Elaine. Elaine, if you're ready, we'll hand the floor
Ready.
over to you.
Fantastic. We're going behind the veil into a magical, sunny land where there's dancing water, singing stones, and talking birds. And if that's not magic enough, we're going to the side of the Yellow River, and there's a hermitage, and an old man is speaking to the young prince who's been sent by his father, the king, to learn how to be good, wise, and kind. And this he has done. And he says to his teacher, "Wise man, where are the evil men? Because I don't want to be ruling a kingdom where evil exists." And the wise man says, "Young prince, there is evil everywhere in the land. You will not conquer it all." And the young prince said, "Well, tell me, who is the most evil? And I will conquer that evil." "Oh," said the wise man, "the giant with 10 heads, he is the most evil, but he will not be vanquished because you need to find dancing water, singing stone, and talking bird. And not only do you have to find those 3 things, when you get to the giant, in order to vanquish him, you must get his huge bow and arrow and kill each of the 10 heads. But they don't all sleep at the same time. So they see you coming. There is always one head awake to warn the giant of any danger." The prince said, "I can do it. I can do it. I can conquer this giant." "Oh, one more thing," said the wise man. "The giant is watchful because he has captured the princess Sita, and he holds her in a dungeon because he wants to observe her beauty, since all he can see in his own kingdom is ugliness, and his 10 ugly heads, each one uglier than the other. An ugly, ugly, black soul." "Oh, in that case," says the prince, "there's no question about it. I must set off and conquer this giant." And he sets off as young men do. Off he goes. And he says, "Now, where will I find dancing water?" Because the wise man didn't know any of these things. He said, "I know. I'll climb to the highest mountain. And from there, if any water is dancing, I will be able to observe it." So, full of enthusiasm and confidence, he scrambles up the hill, which was a mountain actually, and much, much greater than he anticipated. And he was halfway up. He was exhausted. "Oh, this is hard work." And he had some water and he had a drink. He had something to eat. And he said, "Oh, I just so much need somewhere to lie down and just have a rest and regain my strength. And we're in the land of magic. And as if by magic, an oasis appears, as though it's been made for him. And inside the oasis, there's a bed, and it looks the most comfortable bed ever. Well, he couldn't pass this up. He lay down and he slept. And he awoke refreshed. And he thought, right, I can do the rest of this mountain. So he got to the top and he could observe the waterfalls falling down the mountain. And at the bottom, in a pool, he could see the strangest looking bird. And it had its massive beak down into the water and up. And in its beak, not a fish, but a pearl. And it kept doing this until there were a pile of pearls. And he was curious. And he called to the bird, "Why do you not catch fish as other birds do?" And the bird turned and looked at him and went, "Sita." And he said, how do you know about Sita? That is the princess that the giant has. And the bird just looked at him and looked at the pearls and went, "Sita." And the prince says, you want me to take the pearls to Sita? Well, as it happens, that's exactly where I'm going. He said, but there are 3 things I need. He says, the first one is dancing water. And I don't know where to get that. And the bird looked at him and just said, "Sita." And he looked up. And the prince looked up and he could see a throne where the most beautiful, beautiful woman sat with long black hair. She sat on a throne and she had a lute on her knee and a fish at her foot. And she started to play. And as she played, the waters lifted up and started to dance. And they danced and sparkled in the sunlight. And the goddess looked at him. She beckoned him to approach, which he did. She handed him a small phial of water because she knew who he was. And she knew he was going to rescue Sita. So this was the dancing water. And he put it inside his jacket. And he looked at the bird. And the bird looked back at him. And he says, but now I need to find a singing stone. And I've no idea where to go for that. The bird looked at him and went, "Rock, rock." He says, "No, it's a stone I'm looking for, not a rock." The bird just shook its head and went, "Rock, rock," and looked up, and a massive black rock flew down, put its massive claws down, picked up the prince, picked up the bird, tucked him in, and the talking bird said, "Egypt, Egypt." And the rock flew off. And they flew over to the pyramids. And the prince was a bit perplexed. He said, "Okay, we're heading for the pyramids, but I've never heard any of them singing. But then again, I've never seen a talking bird before, so let's just see how it goes." The rock kept flying over the land, and they came to one of the sphinxes. And the prince could hear singing, and it was coming from the sphinx. And the singing was beautiful, and the mouth was opening, and the rock swept down, and the prince snapped off the nose and put it in his jacket. Well, Sphinx wasn't that impressed by that. And if you go to Egypt, you'll notice there's one with a nose missing. Off went the rock again, flying, flying. And the talking bird said, Persia, Persia. And the rock flew round and they came to an island off the coast. Well, there was a forbidding castle there. Oh, this must be where the giant is. How can we approach without being seen? But before he knew it, the rock had stopped on a ledge and let them disembark. Oh, thought the prince, how do we get there? And he says, well, hopefully nobody will have seen us. And magically, they didn't, because the sun had shone down at that point. So the giant didn't see them coming. He was not forewarned by his guards. And they got to the chamber of the giant. And the giant roared, how did you get here? How did my guards not see you? I will kill them. And the prince said, it was not your guards. We came unobserved in a way, in a manner that would not be credible. Ha, said the giant. And he said, so you have 3 things for me before I kill you. The prince says yes. And he went inside his jacket and he peeled out the phial of the dancing water. The giant paled and he said, yes, I see you have 1 thing, but what about the other 2? He said, I believe you want a stone that sings. The prince pulled out the nose, which at that point was snoring. He shook it, and the nose started to pour out a song. The giant paled even more. That was 2 things. The 3rd thing was going to be the charm. He said, so what about this talking bird? What kind of a bird can talk? And the bird stepped out from behind the prince and went, I can, I can, I can. Well, the giant was really, oh, this is not good for me. Those are 3 things. And this voice is probably one of the last ones that you're going to hear. Ah, says the giant, you have to get the bow and the arrows, and you have to get all 10 of my heads. No one can achieve that. It was not the bird that spoke this time. The prince says, I will. And he took the bow and he seemed to develop superhuman strength. And one by one, he fired at the 10 heads. And each time the giant was hit, it was, ah, ah, increasingly, until the 10th head was pierced by an arrow. The strength drained out of the giant. He seemed to just lose everything and fall back. And he staggered back and he staggered back and he fell right out the window. And that was the end of the giant. And as if by magic, which we all know exists, the princess appeared before the prince, and the prince handed her the pearls. I believe these are for you, princess. Ah, and she was so obviously in love with him as soon as she saw him, because he was absolutely, as Shona put it, a hottie. And he was fearless. And she just loved that in a man. So it wasn't long before the agreements were made with both kings, and they were married and lived happily ever after.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you so much. I feel like a lot of us are going to other worlds tonight. I wonder what's going on there. That's really interesting. Brilliant. So we're nearly at the end of our evening. Thanks again for joining us to celebrate La Masse and the start of harvest season, start of hard work. That's what we've got to do for the next 6 weeks. Because even if you're not working in the fields, this is the time to reap the rewards of the things you've been doing this year. So our final storyteller before we hand back to Liz for a final poem is Fionn, who is a young storyteller from Wales, and we're really lucky to have her with us. So Fionn, if you're ready,
Yeah,
take the
I'm ready.
please.
Cool. Well, I'm not going to take you to other worlds, but I am going to take you on a little bit of a journey around the landscape that I'm in now. Amser, Maith and all. Once upon a time, a long time ago, there sat a bird, another bird, up high in his oak tree. His name was Erid Gwernabwy, the eagle of Gwernabwy, and even though he could feel the last of the summer sun on his feathers, he wasn't smiling. He was old and he was alone. All of his chicks had left the nests many, many summers ago, and there was nothing left of his wife but the faint sound of her voice lingering on the breeze. And he didn't want to be alone anymore. He had so many stories to share, but nobody to tell them to. After a little bit of thinking, he decided that it might be time to marry again. Find somebody to share his branch with. But he was old, and not just old, he was ancient. He didn't know if there were any birds who were even close to the same age as him, and he didn't want to marry anyone younger. He would simply tire her out, well, bore her to death, and she would be impossible to keep up with. What could he do? Well, perhaps there was one bird, and come to think of it, the owl of Cwmcawlyd had been around as long as anyone could remember. But he wasn't entirely sure if she was older than he, and he didn't want to ask her. That would be incredibly rude, and her claws were incredibly sharp, so he decided to ask a friend. So he ruffled his feathers, he readied himself, and for the first time in a few weeks, he leapt off from his oak tree and he flew over the beautiful mountains of his home until he came to an oak woodland, and as he looked down beneath him, he could see the beautiful green canopy just starting to turn to its autumn colours, and he scanned around looking for little gaps between the trees. And as he searched and he searched and he searched and he searched, looking for a sign of his friend, Carol Rhedynfre, the stag of Rhedynfre, and just as he was about to turn and give up and go back to his branch, he saw two huge antlers, so tall they almost touched the sun. Finally, he flew down and landed on the forest floor, next to where his friend stood, proud and strong and ancient, on the rotting stump of another oak. And he said, Carol, wyt ti'n gwybod os yw dy Lluan Cwmcawlyd yn old yn hen? Do you know if the owl of Cwmcawlyd is old? And Carol, stag, he thinks to himself, he says, well, I am old. You see this tree stump that I stand on. I remember watching a tiny little acorn fall from the very top of a tree, land in the soil, and grow for 300 years, stand for another 300, and finally rot for another 300 until it became the stump I stand on now. Erid, I am ancient. And to Lluan Cwmcawlyd, she was old when I first knew her, but I do have a friend who is older than me. Maybe she will know. Her name is Eog Llynllifon. Diolch, Carol, said the eagle, and off he flew again, back up through the hole he found in the canopy, over the oak woodland, back towards the mountains, until he came to a glittering blue lake And as he circled the lake, he peered down, trying to find something sparkly, something silver. And there he found her. So he dived down and landed on the rocks by the water's edge, and there he called into the water, Eog, salmon! Salmon. She swims up to the surface and sticks her great head above the water. And she almost seems to be bigger than the Eddard remembered, but it was her all right. He says, Eog, wyt ti'n gwybod os yw dy lluan cwm cawlyd yn hen? Well, says the salmon, I am old. You see the number of scales on my back. You can imagine how many eggs there are in my belly. Well, I have swam a year in this lake for every one of those. I am ancient. And the owl of Cwm Cawlyd was old when I first knew her, but I have a friend who is older than me, and maybe he will know how old she is. His name is Mwyalchen Kilguri. Diolch, says Eryr, and off he flies again, up from Llinllifon, out over this beautiful landscape once more. And this time he has to fly for many, many hours, and he can see the sun start to creep down towards the horizon, but he doesn't give up. He may be old, but there is strength in his wings yet, until eventually he reaches a green field, and he can see in the middle of that green field a little black speck. There he is, there's the blackbird. And so he dives down, flies, and lands in the grass. Next to the blackbird, Mwyalchen Dedyn-du, who is preening his feathers, and almost doesn't notice when the eagle lands next to him. An eagle has to work hard to get his attention. He says, Mwyalchen Dedyn-du, blackbird, hey! What? Do you know if the owl of Cwm Cawlyd is old? Well, says Mwyalchen. Oh, you see this little pebble by my feet? You see how small it is, barely the size of a nut, barely the size of an acorn. Well, I am old. I remember when this little nut was the size of a huge boulder. I remember when this stone would have taken 100 men or more to move, and now a little mouse could roll it away. And you want to know what's happened to it, Eagle? All that has happened to it is me. Every single night before I went to bed, I stroked my wing across its surface. And every morning before I went about my day, I would sharpen my beak against it. And my strokes and my taps have worn it away. I am ancient, and the owl of Cwm Cawlyd, she was old when I first knew her, but I have a friend who is much, much, much older than me, and maybe he will know how old she is. And his name is Llyffant Corfach. Diolch, says Eryr, and he leaps up into the air again, out from the field, up into the clouds, and he flies back the way he came until eventually, as he looks down beneath him, he can see a huge flat marsh full of rushes and tiny little flowers poking up from the soil. And he looks around and he looks and he looks and he looks for the toad until eventually he can see two golden gleaming eyes staring up at him, almost piercing into his very soul. And so, Eagle swoops down and he lands on the marsh. And before he can even open his mouth to ask the question, the toad says, Eryr, I am so old you cannot possibly imagine. You see how flat this marsh where we stand now is. I remember when instead of a flat landscape, this marsh had a huge hill where I sit now. And all that has happened to it, all that has touched it, is me. Every single day, I have eaten half a mouthful of dust. And now, there is nothing left of that mountain. So many, many seasons have passed. So many generations of birds and trees and fish and animals. I was young when I first came here, and Eagle, the owl of Cwmcawlyd, was old even then. If you want to marry her, you don't need to worry about being younger than she is. Diolch, said the Edir. And off he flew again. This time, it almost felt as if the sunlight was trapped within his wings, as he flew away from Cwsfachno all the way to Cwmcawlyd. And there in Cwmcawlyd, in these beautiful green mountains, he didn't have to look for long until he found the owl, sitting on a huge boulder in all of her glory. Edir lands next to Dyllian, and he says, Dyllian, wneud i fy mhriodi. And she thinks long and hard about this because, unlike most of the other love interests in the stories we have heard, Edir Gwernabwy was no longer a hottie. But that's not what was important. The two of them had stories to tell, but no one to listen to those stories. And some company would be nice. What would be the point in being alone on her boulder? And so she agreed to marry him. And the very next day, all of the ancient animals gathered together in Cwmcawlyd, in those mountains, to celebrate the marriage of the eagle and the owl. And they shared stories. They shared poetry, they laughed, and they sang, sharing all of the stories that they had learnt from the earth as time had passed on by. But nobody danced. They were all too old for that. Diolch am wrando.
Brilliant. Thank you, Fionn. Amazing.
Sorry, I'm on mute.
Woo!
That was brilliant. Age is just a number. Loved it. You didn't make us feel old at all. We're so lucky to have heard Fionn, who was Young Storyteller of the Year in 2019 in Wales. So I think you'll all agree the future is looking good. Brilliant. So we've come to the end of our evening. The sun's set here in Loch Goilhead and the moon's risen and the midges are out. So without further ado, I'm going to pass back to you, Liz, to round off this evening.
So this poem is appropriately called Evening. And the thing that triggered this poem was walking back along the side of Buttermere in the Lake District after a long day up in the hills walking. So this is Evening. Gold and azure lies the lake. The sun glows coral pink over jagged peaks. White snow caps lighten the edges of gun-grey crags. Russet bracken and yellow-green sedge soften the ponderous flanks of the mountain masses. A crocheted shawl of greens and browns lies spread untidily over the valley floor. A beck rends a blue-grey tear in the fabric. Slowly, stealthily, a silent thief creeps over the landscape and steals away all the light. The hills sigh, settling into a monochrome sleep. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Liz. I think that was a perfect end to a lovely, lovely evening. Thank you all for coming once again. Happy start of the Harvest Festival. Remember, work hard and reap what you've sown for the rest of the year. Our next session is on the 21st of September, which is a big one for you, right, Kama?
My birthday, is that what you mean?
Oh,
Is it? Oh, what, for us in Wales, you mean Mabon?
yeah, it's Mabon, the next
It
one.
is Mabon, yeah.
I feel like, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it'll be good. So
Brilliant. So
that'll be the final one of our year. So we kind of got together for the Celtic New Year for Soen last year, and we've that'll be the final one in the cycle. So yeah, be exciting. Hopefully we'll do some more. I don't know if we'll continue doing them every time, but we'll see what happens. But that's the end of our first cycle. So yeah, it'd be great if you could join us.
okay.
The
Good night,
21st is a
everyone.
Tuesday, is that right, Karma?
We haven't actually discussed the date.
We haven't discussed it. We usually do it on the Sunday before.
I think so. Which
Okay.
is my birthday. That's my real birthday. No, it's not. I'm
Well,
talking
the 19th.
Yeah, is it? It is. 19th.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kama and I'll stay on, and maybe Maria, but she is on holiday, so she might not be able to stay. If anybody wants to chat, but we'll say good night to the rest of you, and thank you.
Good night. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Bye.
Thank you.
Night. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Can I just ask if you'll send us a reminder for that? Because I've missed all the others. I didn't know about them.
They come through once you've booked. You will get. You'll be on our list.
Yeah, but you have to know before you can book. Or you mean having booked for this one, I'll be on the list?
Yeah, because you've booked for this
Right.
one, you'll be on our list. And we promote it through
Okay,
CARAD
all right.
and through Kerry Writers Museum. And we've also got a Facebook group called Gathering Collective. So if you want to join that as well.
Gathering Collective.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm relatively new to Facebook and I'm hopeless with it. So I'll look that up. Thank you. It was a lovely evening.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Nerissa.
Thank
you,
Done.
everyone.
Bye-bye. Happy Lammas, Lunasa.
Thank you, Fionn. That was amazing.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
I'm
good.
so
I'm glad you liked it. I never have any idea how things go on Zoom. So thanks for telling me that you liked it.
Yeah.
Oh, it was brilliant. I feel so honoured when I hear these really old traditional Welsh stories by brilliant Welsh tellers. I feel like I get a little, I don't know, I feel so honoured.
Thank you.
And thanks again, Liz. That was perfect. Really beautiful way to book
Yeah.
in. Okay. Shall we all get to bed?
Yeah.
Might be sensible. Oh gosh, I didn't realise how late it got.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
well.
That was a fantastic evening again. Thank you. And
Oh,
well
thank
done, Fionn.
Thank you.
I think Karma, I think Tony will have been put out a bit to miss this, but he'll catch up on this.
Yeah, he did send me a message to say he was at London. I said we'd send him the link to the recording.
Yeah, okay. Lovely.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Liz. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been great. I love the storytelling.
Oh.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
Night night. Sleep well.
Night night, Liz. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, Shona.
Oh, yes.
When are me, you and Ilse gonna chat again?
Oh, I haven't caught up with my emails.
Oh, okay.
Did we say Monday? I'll look at them quickly now.
Because I've got a D&V thing Tuesday to Thursday, I think.
Right. Okay, so maybe not this week, maybe next week.
Yeah.
I'll email you first thing.
It'd be great to get you both at the next event. So let's be
Yeah.
organised about it, and we'll get you booked in advance. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'd be really fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's quite fun to get a Scottish, Irish one as well, maybe. Maria.
Yeah, me and Elsa was saying we need to find an Irish storyteller as well.
Yeah. Camma,
Have a
the
talk.
Scottish Storytelling Centre are going to put on a young storytellers open hearth at the festival, and they'll invite Fionn. It's not completely confirmed, but it's pretty much confirmed.
Brilliant. Oh, that's great. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
really, really exciting.
That's really exciting. Yeah, great.
Fingers crossed.
Okay, dokie, shall I sign us off?
Should we say good night then? Yeah, I think Asta's actually gone. She's gone
Thank
back to the
you.
festival, but she's left it open.
Oh.
She was recording.
Night all.
Good night,
Okay.
everybody.
Good
Bye.
night, all.
Bye.
Lovely. Bye.
Bye.
See you, Nissa.
Hormohari harganai irgach brui krobiel tim Hikoren oro huvaho munyan down voyoch Hikoren oro huvaho